NASA and the government have been denying the truth to us. And this is not just theatrics. It is a careful movement on the chessboard of sociological and geopolitical interests. The nation that first understands the physics of interstellar objects and the spacecraft of our visitors will become the most powerful country on Earth. And to reach that objective, they must hide the truth from us. This is why they are concealing the most important aspects of the UFO and UAP phenomenon. And now, the third visitor from interstellar space, the so-called 3-Eye Atlas. But if they think we're being silenced by their lies, they are completely wrong. Because the age of disclosure has started, and the awakening has begun. Humanity stands at a threshold, a moment when the sky itself seems to whisper a truth too immense, too destabilizing for those in power to allow into the open. Because if the world ever accepted that we are not alone, everything would change. Religion, politics, economies, even the foundations of culture would tremble. And every government on Earth knows it. For decades, institutions have controlled information through classified projects, selective releases, and deliberate delays. It's a pattern. Reveal only what keeps the structure intact, conceal whatever might fracture it. And now, this pattern is being tested by something new. Something arriving from deep interstellar space. And this is not the first one. That's the third interstellar object, the so-called 3-Eye Atlas. Officially, NASA calls it an interstellar comet. A harmless traveler, a frozen body drifting in from beyond the solar system. The public narrative is simple and comforting. It behaves like a comet. It looks like a comet. It is a comet. But behind that calm explanation lies a storm of withheld details and suspicious timing. According to public reporting, NASA possessed imagery of 3-Eye Atlas when it passed roughly 30 million kilometers from Mars, but did not release those images immediately. The delay occurred during a government shutdown, fueling allegations that crucial data about this interstellar visitor was held back. Even Harvard astrophysicist Avi Loeb publicly pointed to this silence, suggesting that withholding information creates the impression of a cover-up. At the very same moment this object appeared in our skies, another event unfolded on Earth. The release of The Age of Disclosure, a documentary arguing that governments have hidden evidence of non-human intelligence for more than 80 years. Its message is clear. There has been a deliberate effort to control the greatest truth of all. 3-Eye Atlas was discovered on July 1, 2025. The documentary's premiere followed in the same year. NASA's official images were released only months later, on November 19th. These events cluster together with uncanny synchronicity. A high-profile interstellar object arrives. A film about global secrecy launches. Government agencies respond with unusually cautious language, offering nothing beyond the most conventional explanation. Is this coincidence or choreography? Because if 3-Eye Atlas is more than it appears, then the stakes rise far beyond astronomy. Acknowledging an interstellar object is easy. Acknowledging what might be behind it, that is the threat governments fear. Strategic advantage, social collapse, religious upheaval, loss of global control, and the possibility that this object is not random at all, but purposeful. Officially, 3-Eye Atlas is a comet with a hyperbolic trajectory, unbound by the sun, trailing gas and dust like countless icy visitors before it. But the more closely one looks, the harder it becomes to ignore the quiet speculation growing beneath the surface. What if this object behaves like a comet because it is meant to? What if its appearance is designed to blend into the natural landscape of the cosmos? And what if the civilizations ancient cultures described, beings descending from the heavens in luminous craft, were not myths, but memories? For now, we only acknowledge the possibility, a possibility scientific enough to consider and ancient enough to remember. Because the secrecy surrounding 3I Atlas does not exist in a vacuum. Information is filtered, narratives are shaped, and when the story given to the public is too neat, too convenient, a single question becomes inevitable. Are we hearing the truth, or merely the version safe enough to release? The world stands at the edge of something extraordinary. A turning point where an interstellar visitor, a controversial documentary, and decades of controlled narratives converge. Whether by coincidence or intention, the sky has delivered a message that institutions can no longer easily contain. And this is only the beginning. When NASA finally broke its silence on November 22, 2025, their message was delivered with striking confidence.
But 3I Atlas is a comet.
It looks like a comet, behaves like a comet, and all evidence points to it being a comet. A simple conclusion, a reassuring one, a narrative designed above all to close the door on questions. Their official pages repeat it, a hyperbolic trajectory, unbound by the sun. A tail, a coma. Interstellar in origin, yes, but still nothing more than ice and dust drifting through space. Multiple missions, from the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter to Lucy and Psyche, were cited as having observed the object. And NASA insisted that every piece of data, every image, every measurement fit comfortably within the familiar category of comet. But when such a rare interstellar visitor is reduced to such a certain label, a deeper question emerges. Why the urgency to reassure? NASA didn't just describe a comet, they defended the classification. Their statements emphasized the lack of technological signatures, as if anticipating the very doubts they were trying to suffocate. Critics noticed this tone immediately. Avi Loeb remarked that NASA was educating the public by telling the public nothing new, pointing out that if the agency had already decided the object was a rock, then they were never truly searching for alternative explanations at all. This is where tension enters the story. Because while NASA presented a tidy conclusion, the context surrounding that conclusion suggests something far more complicated. The evidence they offer is real. A visible coma, a hydrogen envelope imaged in ultraviolet, a classical tail structure, and a path that will carry the object out of the solar system forever. Perihelion at 1.4 AU, eccentricity greater than 1, all typical signatures of interstellar comets. But the interpretation of that evidence is controlled, and interpretations can be shaped. A coma doesn't disprove artificiality. A tail can be produced by any number of mechanisms. Even a hyperbolic trajectory can be natural, or intentional. The same features used to reinforce the comet narrative could just as easily hide something more complex. The question becomes, who decides what the data means, and why should their interpretation be final? NASA has a long pattern of delay, denial, and dismissal when faced with phenomena that challenge established models. Loeb's criticism was direct. NASA, he argued, refuses to consider artificial origins because they assume them impossible. The Guardian reported the same sentiment in September 2025, noting NASA's consistent rejection of technological hypotheses, even when acknowledging interesting properties. Then comes the timing, a detail too important to ignore. NASA's long delay in releasing new images of 3I Atlas lined up perfectly with the US government shutdown. For over a month, silence. National Geographic highlighted this gap, noting that the agency had not commented during the entire shutdown, the longest in US history. Silence is easy to explain, but it is also easy to use. In conspiracy analysis, such a delay becomes more than inconvenience, it becomes opportunity. Time to filter information, time to shape the narrative, time to decide what the public may and may not know. And through that silence, the pattern becomes familiar. Decades of "we're looking into it," decades of "we found nothing unusual," decades of withholding, redacting, reframing, a rhythm of delay, deny, distract. If the public wonders why NASA isn't entertaining alternative theories, the answer may lie not in science, but in sociology. Admitting extraterrestrial intelligence is not simply a scientific statement. It is a cultural and political earthquake. And that is why institutions cling desperately to natural explanations, even when faced with anomalies. The broader scientific community leans heavily on the principle of natural explanation first, Occam's razor. But critics argue that this has mutated into a bias, one that excludes certain possibilities before they are even examined. The government's recent UAP disclosures show that unidentified phenomena are real, documented, and sometimes unexplained. And yet NASA still handles 3I Atlas with rigid conventionality. When an object challenges the boundaries of what is acceptable, the safest move is simple. Call it a comet. Close the case before it opens, but the story doesn't end there. Because behind the smooth statements and carefully chosen words lies a deeper tension. NASA offers the facts, but not necessarily the full map. They share the data, but not the implications. They tell the public what the object is, not what it could be. And in that gap between what is shown and what is withheld, a new question rises. If nothing is unusual, why does the narrative feel so carefully managed? There is sufficient evidence that suggests 3I Atlas may be something far more extraordinary than a simple and normal comet. When the official narrative collapses under its own weight, the truth emerges in the details. And with 3I Atlas, those details form a pattern that refuses to be ignored. A pattern that scientists, astronomers, and even mainstream journalists cannot fully explain. Because this so-called comet breaks the rules of what a comet is supposed to be. Avi Loeb has already laid the foundation. In his analysis, more than a dozen anomalies stand out, each one a small crack in the conventional story, but together, a fracture that exposes something far deeper. The first anomaly is its trajectory. 3I Atlas travels on a hyperbolic path with an eccentricity greater than 6, far more extreme than most known interstellar objects. That alone suggests an origin from outside our solar system. But the peculiarities don't end there. The object moves in a retrograde orbit, yet with an inclination of only about 5 degrees relative to the ecliptic. For an interstellar visitor, this alignment is strange, too aligned, too precise, too coordinated with the plane of our own planets. Then we confront the non-gravitational acceleration, tiny but measurable thrusts that do not match the expected outgassing of a natural comet. Loeb points out that these accelerations were not random. They adjusted the object's path toward a very specific region, Jupiter's Hill radius, a gravitational boundary roughly 53.5 million kilometers from Jupiter. And calculations suggest 3I Atlas may reach that boundary on March 16, 2026, guided by the same subtle pushes that defy standard comet physics. Why would a natural body correct its trajectory toward a giant planet's zone of influence? Other anomalies deepen the mystery. Sideways jets, tiny ejection streams that fire perpendicular to the line between the comet and the sun, have been documented by observers. These aren't typical sublimation patterns. They resemble controlled bursts more than chaotic outgassing. And then there is the chemistry. Spectroscopy reveals a CO2-dominated coma, with a CO2 to H2O ratio around 8:1. This is unusually high, far outside the range of typical comets. Some scientists suggest this means heavy cosmic ray processing over vast interstellar distances. Others argue it could imply a composition unlike anything formed near our Sun. The cosmic ray exposure itself tells another story. Spectral reddening and chemical transformation that indicate an object exposed to deep space radiation for an extraordinarily long time, perhaps eons, perhaps by design. Observers also noted unexpected brightening behaviors, rapid changes in luminosity not accounted for by standard cometary models, mini-jets, multiple ejection sources, even an unusually large nucleus compared with expectations for an interstellar visitor. Each anomaly could be dismissed as a curiosity, but all of them together demand a question. What exactly is 3I Atlas? Even Loeb dared to ask what few others would. He wrote openly, "Let us suppose that the interstellar object 3I Atlas is a mothership." A speculative hypothesis, yes, but grounded in the fact that nothing about this object fully matches natural expectations. Meanwhile, mainstream sources like IFL Science argue the opposite, pointing to its comet-like appearance. Between certainty and doubt lies the gray zone where truth often hides. So the real question becomes, what would it take to convince someone that this is not a comet at all, but a probe, a drone, a vessel, or a remnant of technology older than human civilization? If an advanced civilization wanted to slip a craft into a solar system without alarming its inhabitants, wouldn't mimicking a comet be the perfect disguise? A familiar shape, a familiar tail, a familiar path, until the anomalies reveal what the facade cannot fully conceal. And when ancient civilizations carved images of skyships descending from the heavens, when Mesopotamian myths described beings who arrived in radiant vessels, when cultures spoke of flying chambers, chariots, or fiery boats, were they witnessing natural objects? Or something engineered? Because the features of 3I Atlas, its deliberate trajectory, its strange jets, its unusual chemistry, echo the old descriptions of celestial machines more than they mirror the behavior of typical comets. Perhaps 3I Atlas is not new at all. Perhaps it is a modern expression of an ancient pattern, the return of objects that visit, observe, or pass through with intent. Could this be a probe, a surveillance craft, a messenger, a relic left to drift until the right moment in history? We cannot answer these questions yet, but the anomalies leave the door open, wider than most are willing to admit. When data contradicts the official story, the responsible response is not to dismiss, but to investigate. And when the evidence clusters into a shape that resembles intelligence, attention must follow. Because if 3I Atlas is more than a comet, then everything changes. Truth does not rise from institutions alone. Sometimes it begins in the backyards of ordinary people, in the quiet hands of amateur astronomers who aim their telescopes at the sky and record what others overlook. And when 3I Atlas entered the inner solar system, these observers became the first line of resistance against the official story. Across forums and astrophotography groups, images began to surface. Not polished, not perfect, but consistent. Independent observers capturing unexpected brightening, abrupt shifts in magnitude, and irregularities in the tail that didn't match the predicted models. Some noted slight deviations in its path, Others reported energy-like pulses or flares appearing when the object crossed certain orbital regions. And many noticed the tail itself bending, wobbling, or changing direction in ways that defied the simple influence of the solar wind. None of these observations, on their own, prove anything extraordinary, but the sheer volume of them, the frequency, the shared patterns, the global spread, created a new current of curiosity, a quiet rebellion. Because when the scientific world insists that nothing unusual is happening, yet hundreds of enthusiasts see something strange through their own lenses, the question becomes unavoidable. What is the public noticing that the institutions are not saying? This grassroots awakening didn't stop at telescopes. As the object grew brighter and the anomalies more widely discussed, the conversation spilled into digital spaces. Reddit threads erupted with speculation, linking the arrival of 3I Atlas to a much larger narrative. Podcasts dedicated to UFOs and UAPs shifted their discussions toward this interstellar visitor. Alternative news outlets began publishing bold headlines. What NASA isn't telling you about the interstellar object. 3I Atlas, the Comet lie. A narrative was forming, not from officials, but from the people themselves. Even the release of the Age of Disclosure poured fuel on the fire. The documentary, featuring former officials claiming an 80-year cover-up of extraterrestrial reality, arrived at the exact moment 3I Atlas dominated headlines. Reviews noted its accusations of secrecy, its insistence that governments have kept the truth hidden. Some viewers dismissed it. Others embraced it as a long-overdue challenge to institutional silence. Online debates intensified. Was this documentary a wake-up call or a distraction? A warning or entertainment? Regardless of the opinion, one fact stood out. The public was paying attention. And this attention marked a shift. Disclosure was no longer just about distant lights in the sky or military videos of unidentified objects. It was about something real and present, something observable, something entering the solar system in plain sight. The conversation expanded beyond UFOs. It now touched identity, power, belief, and history itself. People began to ask not only are we alone, but who decides what we are allowed to know? The idea of disclosure evolved from a question into a movement, a collective awareness spreading through ordinary citizens, hobbyists, researchers, and curious minds around the world. This was no longer fringe discussion. This was the emerging fault line in public consciousness, a truth hidden in plain sight. A visitor labeled a comet, a documentary exposing decades of secrecy, and a public finally lifting its eyes to the sky. What began as a scientific curiosity had become a cultural moment, a turning point where the people themselves stepped into the story. And with that awakening comes the next layer of truth, the one institutions fear the most. The past may be returning. Long before telescopes, satellites, and space probes, ancient civilizations looked to the heavens and recorded what they saw. Not myths, not metaphors, descriptions, precise, vivid, strangely technological. Across Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon, the sky was not silent. It was alive with visitors. They wrote of beings who descended from the stars, beings who traveled in fiery chariots, in celestial boats, in shining objects, in flying wheels, in vessels of the gods. To them, the sky was a corridor of motion, a place where the divine arrived and departed, a realm where the ones later interpreted as Anunnaki came from the heavens and returned to them. And now, thousands of years later, an object from beyond the solar system enters our skies again. not formed here, not shaped by our sun. A true outsider. This alone changes everything. Because if something comes from another system, it can come from anywhere, any star, any region of the galaxy, any world where advanced civilizations may exist. Ancient cultures described visitors from the stars. Today, an object from the stars arrives again. The patterns across time begin to echo. Ancient texts speak of heavenly boats that glimmer like metal, of objects that roar as they descend, of star chambers shining with terrible fire, of celestial chariots riding the winds, of craft ascending in pillars of flame. These descriptions appear across continents. In Egypt, the boats of Ra sailing the sky. In Mesopotamia, flying chambers delivering the gods. In Hebrew writings, the rotating glowing Merkaba. In India, the Vimanas, machines powered by unknown forces. Separate cultures, separate languages, the same story. Craft descending from the heavens, craft arriving from the faraway home, craft that come, observe, intervene, then depart. And now 3I Atlas appears from the faraway, not merely passing through space, but exhibiting behaviors that resemble intelligence. Unusual motions, non-gravitational accelerations, jet-like bursts, directional shifts, chemical signatures unlike typical comets. Thousands of years ago, our ancestors witnessed objects descending from the sky. Today, with telescopes and data, we may be witnessing the same phenomenon, cloaked in the appearance of a comet. So what could 3I Atlas be? A returning probe, sent by an ancient civilization long before humanity stood upright. A surveillance craft, arriving at a moment when our world is undergoing a technological transformation, observing how far we've come. A seed ship, carrying genetic or biological cargo, part of a process we do not yet understand. A cosmic messenger, using methods of communication far older than our sciences, or perhaps, and here we step into the oldest memory of all, the first sign that the ones who descended in ancient times may return as they came. We do not assert that it comes from Nibiru as a specific planet. But if the beings remembered in ancient texts originated from somewhere beyond our system, then 3I Atlas could have emerged from any region where such civilizations dwell. The ancients left warnings, prophecies, and testimonies carved in stone. They described sky beings and sky ships not as stories but as events. They insisted these were real, historical, witnessed, recorded. And their recurring message echoes through time. What has been will be again. Today, an object arrives from interstellar space. Scientists debate its anomalies. Governments speak cautiously. The public senses something shifting, and ancient stories begin to feel less like myth and more like memory. This is not new. This has happened before. It was carved in stone, and now it may be happening again. So we must ask, are we witnessing the return of the sky gods, or the arrival of a new intelligence altogether? There is a reason the truth has been buried. Not because governments are ignorant, not because agencies lack data, but because the arrival of non-human intelligence is the single most destabilizing revelation in human history. The institutions of our world do not fear extraterrestrials. They fear us. Our reaction, our panic, our collapse. Those in power understand the consequences. If humanity ever confronts undeniable proof that an advanced intelligence exists, that it is near, observing, maybe even arriving, the foundations of our reality begin to fracture. Religions would tremble, political systems could lose legitimacy overnight, markets would spiral, social order could collapse, and global alliances might be torn apart as nations scramble for control of alien technology. They fear the reaction more than the revelation. Disclosure is not a scientific problem. It's a political earthquake. Because if 3I Atlas is even partially artificial, then the stakes rise beyond imagination. Inside a single interstellar object could lie technologies capable of overpowering every military, every industry, every government on Earth. Propulsion systems that defy our physics. Materials we cannot reproduce. Energy sources that could erase entire economies. Communication systems far beyond our reach. Biochemical or genetic mechanisms we've never seen. A recovered Starship is not just hardware, it's supremacy. With alien technology, a single nation could outrun the entire world. And this is why secrecy becomes strategy, not chaos, not confusion, but careful, deliberate engineering. Governments release tiny disclosures, UAP footage, declassified reports, just enough to condition the public without risking panic. NASA sticks to controlled narratives, avoiding definitive statements that could open the floodgates. Intelligence agencies compartmentalize data so no single institution knows the full scope. Slow disclosure, managed risk, choreographed truth. It is not confusion, it is choreography. They are not just hiding the truth, they are managing it. Because institutions fear what disclosure would do to them, not to the sky. Governments fear losing authority. Scientific institutions fear losing certainty. Religious institutions fear losing believers. And global powers fear each other, especially if even the possibility exists that one nation might access extraterrestrial technology first. So the silence around 3I Atlas becomes predictable, strategic, necessary in their eyes. Yet something is shifting. The amateur astronomers have noticed. The public is awakening. The anomalies refuse to disappear, and ancient memory rises to the surface again. Evidence accumulates, patterns repeat. And the arrival of an interstellar visitor at this precise moment is becoming too large to contain. Despite every attempt at control, suppression, and distraction, a truth older than civilization itself is beginning to break through. The truth can't be buried forever. The sky speaks, and the time of revelation has begun, and the age of disclosure is here. Are you prepared? See you in the next video.